Uh, Good afternoon. My name is Don Ficken. I'm with the Lights Out Heartland program, which is a collaboration of many states. I'll talk about that in just a minute. We had a great presenter today, Richard O'Brien from Dark Sky, Colorado. He's the founder of Lights Out Colorado, and he's going to talk a little bit about what they're doing in Lights Out Colorado. Before we start that, what I like to do is just talk a little bit about what we're doing with our what's called Lights Out Heartland, if you're not familiar with that. It's a collaboration of organizations through what we call the Heartland of America, several states. We've got at least 6 states involved right now. You can see some of the logos. And our goal is pretty simple. It's really just to turn off and reduce lights during critical migration periods. We typically use May and September. And it's part of whenever the birds migrate, they obviously are getting disoriented between as they fly north, either to the nesting or wintering grounds. So here's some maps of the migration areas. You can see the blue area is the Mississippi Flyway. That's a big area of concern, but there's also the Central Flyway. There's millions of birds, actually billions of birds that migrate throughout the United States and Canada every year, and most of those migrate at night. And the reason they migrate at night is they use the stars and moons for navigation. But they can get disoriented and confused by bright lights and sky glow. And the light of urban and suburban areas will actually draw them toward that light, and that causes some mortality. The breakdown of birds, you would think high rises would be the biggest number, and it really is in terms of just per incident, you might say. But there's also a lot of issues with low rises and even residences that could cause problems with birds migrating. So there are some lighting principles that if you learn from the Dark Sky Missouri, if you visit their website or our Dark Sky Missouri website or the Dark Sky Colorado website, I'm sure you can learn that there's some simple principles. Obviously, you want to make sure that your lighting is useful, that you have it on for a purpose, it's targeted, that you keep it no brighter than necessary, and that a lot of times you can actually turn it off by using controls. In other words, if you don't need it, it maybe comes on when somebody walks by or whatever else, and to make sure they're warm colored. Those are all simple things that you can do that could really help with lights, and we encourage you to look into that. We've got a Lights Out Colorado presentation this month. Next month, we'll be doing a program on Lights Out Arkansas. They're going to talk about some things they're doing. So we are recording this. It'll be posted on the front page of our Lights Out Heartland website. And so we encourage you to follow us and on our webpage, facebook.com, Lights Out Heartland, and do what you can do to support us.
That's March that you've got Arkansas giving a talk.
Hi, how are you?
Sorry about that. So, okay. Yeah, March, right. So, okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to stop sharing, and we're going to get Richard in started. So Richard, you can go ahead and share your screen, and we'll go from there. By the way, we will be taking questions at the end. If you want to post them into Facebook Live or Zoom, that would be great. Chat, that'd be great.
Okay, hi, I'm Richard O'Brien. I'm from Colorado, and I'm here to talk a little bit about Lights Out Colorado, and most importantly, to compare and contrast it to what maybe is going on in other Lights Out programs in other places like Lights Out Heartland. So that's what we're doing here. The topics I have on the list here, we're going to skip over the who is the audience part, because we've got the Facebook audience too, and we can't really get you involved in that. I'll talk more with Lights Out Heartland people directly through Zoom later. But then we're going to go into basically an emphasis on how is Lights Out Colorado different from other Lights Out programs. And so we're comparing Colorado to Missouri and comparing Lights Out Colorado to Lights Out Heartland. The emphasis involved, the sponsors involved, what the volunteers are up to, research and outreach and so forth. And then finally finish up with what kind of results have we seen for Lights Out Colorado over the past 3 years. So first of all, about me, I'm a volunteer for Lights Out Colorado and Dark Sky Colorado. I'm not a paid staff member. Dark Sky Colorado is actually a formal organization. It's a 501c3. It sponsors Lights Out Colorado. Lights Out Colorado is a program without its own independent organization. I live in Boulder, Colorado, and I have a job. I work for NOAA, actually, that has the National Weather Service and research on the atmosphere and such. I like to hike and spend time outdoors, including stargazing and bird watching, which I'm hoping many of you in the audience are among the fans of those things too. And we're going to skip about having you introduce yourselves, since I won't be able to see those of you watching through Facebook. So we'll go right on to Colorado as compared to Missouri. So as a state, Colorado has about the same number of human residents. Colorado has a slightly larger land area than Missouri, but it's pretty comparable. And Colorado has a significant number of migrating birds, but not nearly as many as Missouri. As you're probably aware, Missouri is off the map in terms of migrating birds. There are few places in the world that can compare to the volume of birds that you see coming through Missouri. We still have quite a few, though, and many relative to the number of humans in Colorado. Colorado, you may not be aware of Colorado's geography. Colorado's eastern third is part of the Great Plains. So if you think of Kansas, only much less water, then you can kind of imagine what eastern Colorado looks like. The western 2/3 of the state is where the mountains are, and a lot of you are familiar with that as well. Most of Colorado's human population lives along the north-south line through Denver, which is called the Front Range Urban Corridor. And everywhere else in the state is rural, and quite rural. There are no large cities anywhere else in the state. So similarities between Lights Out Heartland and Lights Out Colorado, these are just ones that I know about, and I'm not really familiar with Lights Out Heartland, so there may be others that I'm not aware of. But one of the big similarities is that both Dark Sky and Audubon are involved in these ventures. A lot of the graphics were developed by Dark Sky International and National Audubon, and so you'll see the same graphics, a lot of them, on our website as you'll see on the Lights Out Heartland website. And the recommendations from Dark Sky, with an emphasis on shielding and the 5 principles of responsible outdoor lighting, are seen in the Lights Out Colorado program. Now, many Lights Out programs are not sponsored by Dark Sky. They're sponsored by Audubon only, or perhaps another organization, and so they don't contain those same recommendations that come from Dark Sky. And so that's similar between Lights Out Heartland and Lights Out Colorado. We're both Dark Sky influenced. And here, many of you have probably seen this map from the National Audubon website. This is Lights Out programs in most of the US, and you can kind of see that in the eastern part of the US, there are lots and lots of cities that have Lights Out programs. And a lot of the newer programs are farther west, and they're the shaded states there that are actually regional Lights Out programs. And most of those are newer, including Lights Out Colorado and Lights Out Heartland. So these older city-based Lights Out programs tend to focus on building collisions in city centers. So for example, there is a Lights Out Denver program which focuses on buildings in downtown Denver. So this is an issue for several dozen building managers in downtown Denver, but for the 6 million other people in Colorado, it's not really part of what they're involved in. Newer programs like Lights Out Colorado focus on the navigational disruption of migratory birds by our artificial lights, regardless of where the lights are mounted. They might be on a tall building, or they might be on the ground. And the birds don't really care where they are, whether they're high or low. And we've learned a lot, research has learned a lot in the last couple of decades about what really matters to the birds. So in case you're curious about this issue of building collisions versus navigational disruption, we have a blog article about this, why building collision is not the biggest problem for migrating birds in Colorado, and why navigational disruption of migrating birds is a bigger issue in Colorado. We're not on the Gulf of Mexico. We don't have a Great Lake nearby, and we don't have the huge building collision events like happen in places like Chicago or Houston. We tend to have millions of birds migrating through the state, and most of them are affected by the navigational disruption, but only a few hundred are affected by the building collision problem. So Lights Out Colorado is sponsored by these two formal organizations, Dark Sky Colorado and Denver Audubon. And so there are paid staff and premises for both of those organizations, and they provide a lot of infrastructure for Lights Out Colorado. But Lights Out Colorado is basically an all-volunteer organization, and we have no paid employees or office whatsoever. So low overhead, but it's also not as well organized in other ways. We are fortunate in Colorado to have really close relationships with collaborators from National Audubon, who have an office in Fort Collins, Colorado, the World Migratory Bird Day, which is headquartered here in Boulder, where I am, and Colorado State University's Aero Eco Lab, which some of you may know is a partner in the Birdcast effort to forecast bird migration in the United States. They partner with the Cornell Lab of Ornithology and others to produce these forecasts. So the biggest feature of Lights Out Colorado are our 400 or more volunteer advocates, which are located all over the state of Colorado. And this is a map that shows a pin for the approximate location of each of the advocates. And you can see that there are a huge number covering up Denver there and between Colorado Springs and Fort Collins, because that's where all the people in Colorado live, and only relatively few live in other places. We do have a lot of advocates, though, out in other places in Colorado. And all of these advocates are talking to their local city councils, are talking to their local Rotary clubs, are talking to their local HSAs, to HOAs, excuse me. They are presenting at public schools, and that is kind of the primary feature that we use to talk to the world. So all of these volunteers are familiar with our website, which has a lot of the same resources on it that the Lights Out Heartland website has. So you're welcome to go take a look anytime you want to. If you just do a Google search for Lights Out Colorado, the first result will be our website, and so you can find it quite easily. One of the main tools we and the 400 advocates use is the Colorado State University Aero Eco Labs forecasts. And these are actually the same forecast as you find on birdcast.info, but on birdcast.info, it's presented more as a national forecast and less as a local forecast. With Aero Eco Lab, we can set it specifically for Colorado and get just a map of Colorado and what the alerts are. You could do the same thing for Missouri. You could just do aeroecolab.com/Missouri and get a similar map of Missouri and the colored alerts showing what we're expecting for the next 3 days. Now, if this were migration season, we would see some red on those maps down below, because that would be the heavy migration that would be happening. That yellow and orange is relatively less migration because we're not in migration season right now. Now, most of you probably are familiar with the Birdcast Migration Dashboard. And as you can see from where the red box is here, that this is set for a particular county in Colorado, and it also goes for a particular night of the year. Let me go on though. I usually look at the one for all of Colorado. And so I see that one of the peak nights we had in this last migration season, we had about 30,000 birds in the air over Colorado at one time. That was at 12 a.m. midnight on September 16th. And that was one of our biggest nights of the fall migration. If you change this to Missouri, though, you see that on a different night of the fall, there was one night where there was a peak of nearly 150 million birds in flight over Missouri. And that was October 5th at about 10:40 p.m. Now, what you'll see from the Birdcast Migration dashboard here is for each hour of the night, on the left-hand column here, you'll be able to see a graph of how many birds there are in flight over Missouri. Okay, so you can see where the peak was a little bit after 10:40 p.m. exactly. And these birds were going fast. At this particular night, they were going, the average was almost 35 miles per hour. And we know that songbirds can only fly at like 20 miles per hour. So on this particular night, they had a tailwind, and that's part of the reason there were so many up in the air, was that they had a tailwind and they could cover 35 miles for each hour that they flew instead of the normal 20 miles that they would get for each hour. Then the middle column of this display here shows graphs of what the migration looks like for the whole season. So like for this whole fall season, you can see in gray the average levels, and you can see on the green line, you can see the actual nightly amounts of migration. And you can see that there were these extremely high peaks on several nights throughout the fall migration season. And the particular nights vary from season to season. And that's why you see just a smooth curve down below in the gray shaded area. That is the average of all of the nights for the last decade. And then the last graph there shows the total birds that crossed Missouri for this migration season. And you can see the average in gray there, the gray, and the green line represents this particular migration season. And then there's a crosshair there on this particular night, which was October 5th of 2023. So this was a big night. But overall, this fall's migration was about the same as it has been for most of the last 10 years. So now, most of you have probably seen this before, but this is the radar information that all of this Birdcast Migration dashboard information is based on. And where this comes from is weather surveillance radars, that we have a network of them all over the United States. And each of these white dots is a radar station. And all of these radar stations, all of the information from all these radar stations can be combined into one big composite. And so if I press click here, it'll move forward, and you can see a combination of birds and weather in this picture. Now, when the TV weather forecasters show this, they filter out all the birds so that you can see, oops, I missed the stopping place there. There we go. So you can see just the weather and not the birds, but the bird researchers do the opposite, and they filter out all the weather so you can see the birds. Oops, and I missed that. Okay, so there are the birds, and here's the combined thing, and you can see, now this is 1 month, every night for a month, a time lapse of all of the radar data from all of these stations all over the United States. And all of that huge bloom are migrating birds. And those can be actually very carefully counted by the computers that are connected to the radar network. And so that researchers can give us very detailed numbers on how many birds are over our particular part of the world at any given time. So that's where all of this Birdcast migration dashboard information comes from. Let's see. Now, part of the Birdcast migration dashboard talks about what the expected nocturnal migrants would be on this particular night of the year in this particular place. Now, in this case, I've done a screenshot of Hinsdale County in Colorado. So that's not your location, but this is an example of what you would see if you looked up your particular county, whether that's St. Louis County or wherever it is. Now, if you went to the Western Wood Pewee and you clicked on this link, you would actually get to go to the eBird website and get much more detailed information about that particular species. And on eBird, you can actually set the location again up here in the upper right-hand corner. I've set it for a particular county in Colorado, but again, you'd set it for your own county, so you would see it, because as you scroll down this page, then you'd see media, photos, audio, and videos that were taken in your county of this particular bird. And so that's a really tremendous resource to have. And hopefully those of you that are birders out there have used this resource already. Now, further in eBird, if you go further into eBird, you can look at what eBird calls hotspots. And these are particular locations. Like in this case, there's one little town out in Hinsdale County in Western Colorado that I've taken a snapshot here. And it shows all of the birders who have submitted reports of sightings. And when the reports, now I did the screenshot many months ago, and so you can see that this is information from last May. But this is an idea of what you could see. You can pick your own favorite birding spot in your county, in your location, and see what other birders have seen in your location. And then you can also drill down and see for your particular hotspot what the sightings have been like for a particular species over the months. And some species you'll see are commonly seen only during migration season. Some species you can see during the summer. You can see all year round. Most of these species out in Lake City, which is a mountain town, basically there aren't any reports from the winter. So, you know, in other places, there are probably some birding reports from the winter, and when things are not so snow covered, and you would see some information there. And then hopefully a lot of you in the audience too are familiar with Audubon's Bird Migration Explorer. And this is a way to find out about continental scale bird migration. And so that you see what birds are likely to come through your part of the country at what time of the year. And you can drill down and get all kinds of information about particular bird species and their paths and so forth, and where they winter, whether it's in South America or Central America or where maybe Mexico or where it is, and when they migrate and what path they take when they migrate and so forth. Very useful. And all of our advocates in Lights Out Colorado are familiar with this website, so that when they go to talk to the city council or whatever, they have much deeper knowledge than anybody on the city council has. And so hopefully they can answer questions about what's going on. So one way that Lights Out Colorado is different from others is, and I'm almost out of time here, but we participate in research projects, two very notable research projects. The first is one called Skyglow over the Colorado Front Range Urban Corridor, in which Lights Out Colorado got a grant from Lighthawk Conservation Flying to do a series of airplane flights at 2,000 feet above ground level That's not above sea level, by the way. That's above ground level, which is kind of important in Colorado, because there's no place in Colorado that's 2,000 feet above sea level. But the birds only care about 2,000 feet above ground level. They care about how high they are. 2,000 feet is about how high they cruise when they're migrating. And that's notably, that's higher than any building in Colorado. So, you know, once they reach cruising altitudes, building collisions is not really an issue for them in Colorado. During this research project, we recorded video and still photos showing what birds can see from this altitude and how their navigation might be thrown off. One of the things that we saw from this was how much brighter the lights on the ground were to the birds than the stars in the sky. And we know from research that birds depend upon seeing the stars to be able to know how to navigate on their migration. So that's really important. Another research project that we're still active in is the National Science Foundation's growing convergence research called "Can Bird Migration Forecasting Be Useful for Limiting the Light Pollution Impact on Migrating Birds?" And it's led by researchers at the Aero Eco Lab, which is at Colorado State University. But this is a national project. It's a big project, and big dollar and many years in progress. It's been going for 2 or 3 years now and will be going for 2 or 3 more probably. Participants include several Lights Out programs, including Lights Out Colorado, several Audubon organizations, including New York City Audubon, National Audubon, and others, the U.S. National Park Service, academic researchers from several universities, and finally, one thing that we focus on is reaching out to governmental bodies. Our network of over 400 volunteer advocates make it a priority to visit their city councils and their county commissions to talk about what birds need in terms of our lighting. And so we do that very much. We've also worked at the state level. We've had a number of state governor proclamations, including this Lights Off for Bird Migration Month in April 2022, and several others. We've had a total of 5 governor proclamations in the last 5 years, so that we're very active at. And that's significant, not because it has any force of law, but because it attracts lots of attention. Every news media has stories about the governor's proclamations. And so we get press every single time one of these comes out. So everybody in Colorado hears about Lights Out Colorado. And we work with the Colorado legislature too. Right now we've got an act that they're considering this session in the Colorado legislature concerning installation of outdoor lighting by the state. And we haven't been very good yet at being able to retrofit old problem lighting, but for installing new lighting, we've really done a lot of work. And finally, the last level is we do a lot of outreach with education. We've had a Lights Out Colorado volunteer who is also a professional educator who has written 2 curriculum plans for teachers regarding light pollution and bird migration, and that teachers can get these curricula from our website. And we also have volunteers presenting at schools. So a volunteer will come in and present to a class on the issue of light pollution and bird migration. And finally, before I stop here, the results for the last few years of Lights Out Colorado, we've done a really good job of increasing awareness of the problem. We've done a good job of changing to more appropriate lighting for new installs, but we have not been able to crack the egg of retrofitting existing problem lighting, partly because that requires a lot of money and we haven't been able to figure out where to find all the money. And that brings up the issue of we are an all-volunteer program, And so we are limited by what the volunteers want to do with their time. We can't order anybody to do anything. And so there are some gaps that we are missing some things that we should be doing if we had professional staff. But we are doing the best we can. We do a lot with the volunteers that we have. So that's all I have. Dawn, can you tell me, do we have?
Yeah, we can absolutely take a few minutes. In fact, we have a number of people that have joined us. Feel free to go ahead and just talk, folks. We can certainly do it through chat, but I think we've got a small enough group here that I'm comfortable if you have some questions for Richard.
It's a good program.
Yeah.
Thanks.
It certainly sets the bar pretty high for us, I would think, Yeah. So
Absolutely.
the volunteers, are they part of your organization itself per se, or are they part of member organizations that are part of your group? Does that make sense?
Most of the Lights Out Colorado volunteers are not members of Dark Sky Colorado. Probably 2/3 of them are not members. And so they give gifts through our giving platform, Colorado Gives, which are specifically for Lights Out Colorado. So that's where our money comes from. Dark Sky Colorado manages that money, but keeps it segregated off so that only Lights Out Colorado money can be spent on Lights Out Colorado expenses.
I have a question. And I don't know if this is the right venue for this question, but I'm really curious about how the mountain ranges affect the migration, simply because I used to live in San Juan County, Colorado, and we were down in a bowl, and I'm just curious if there's a small community that has lighting, but the community is down in the bowl, can the birds still be drawn? Yes,
it's still a problem, but it is kind of unique in the mountain towns because migrating birds tend to take the passes. They don't try to fly over the 14,000 foot tall mountains. They go through the passes. And so they get funneled along the river valleys through the passes, but those also tend to be where all the people live.
Right.
And so the lighting on the ground is an even bigger problem in those mountain communities because the migrating birds tend to be funneled over them.
Okay, even the small little mountain towns, huh?
Yes, and of course it varies from place to place a little bit. Right. Many of the mountain towns are located in the river valleys that are between the really tall mountains, and so we see huge numbers of migrating birds coming through there because, again, very few travel over the 14,000 foot high mountains because it's almost impossible for a little bird to get that high.
Right. Thank you. I've been really curious about that.
Hey, Richard, I'd like to follow up on something you mentioned during your talk, and that's that Light Hawk Conservation Flying grant situation.
Yes, that's a really good organization for you folks to get to know. They specialize in conservation projects, and they did a grant for us because we were wanting to do something that required airplanes. 2,000 feet above the ground is too high for our drones. Drones are good for looking at lighting on the ground, but they're not so good at getting high enough to be where the birds are. And we wanted to see what the birds see, and 2,000 feet is still lower than most airplanes fly. Most airplanes fly above 10,000 feet above the ground, So this is kind of a specialized thing that we did.
So are they both a grant, an organization that gives grants, and they actually have the staff and the planes to do the work? Or I wasn't quite understanding how that worked.
They are a nonprofit organization. The paid staff do the management, but the flying of the airplanes is actually done by volunteers. So we got a couple of volunteer pilots from here in Colorado who are willing to work for Lighthawk and donate their services. They donate both the use of their airplane and their own work as pilot to go up. But it's through the Lighthawk organization. If you look at their website, you'll figure out how to apply for a grant from them.
Okay. And who was the person, or how did you have, who identified the correct technology for taking those pictures and for measuring the light that you wanted to measure with
Well,
that?
for that, we had to actually hire a specialist. We got a
Okay.
media specialist to go up with our volunteer pilot, who was paid, who did the videography and the still photos and so forth, because that was really beyond the capabilities of any of our volunteers.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you for the heads up on that. That sounds very interesting.
Any more questions?
I have a question, Richard, and I'm really sorry if you went over this. I had a bit of dog chaos at my house at the exact time that I was like trying to listen to this part, but how did you recruit and train like more than 400 advocates? That's a lot.
Yes, well, it's mainly through our website that we got in contact with them. They were invited through our website to sign up, and then they got on an email list. And I didn't talk about this very much, but during migration seasons, I email the whole list of 420 some odd volunteers, like maybe 3 or 4 times each migration season, with updates about how the migration season is going in Colorado, what the forecast is showing, what the past few days of migration has shown, and so forth. Because these are volunteers, they don't look at it every day. I do. Every morning I look at the past night's migration and at the future forecast, and then I'm ready to alert the entire network if there's a particularly high forecast.
Are there any other questions for Richard? All right, Richard, we're going to go ahead and stop the Facebook Live portion of this, and thank you if you've joined from Facebook Live. We're going to continue on. We have a normal partner meeting. We'll wrap that up here pretty soon, actually, for those that are actually got real jobs. They'll appreciate that. But I do want to thank you, Richard, for this, and this will be has been recorded and will be placed on the front page of our Lights Out Heartland website for others to see, and hopefully through the Facebook page itself. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the Facebook Live here, and we're going to continue on with our regular meeting here. So thank you, Richard.